Hello, my name is Addie, and I'm going to be presenting a video I made for my neuroscience capstone today. So as I'm sure you've all heard throughout your life, exercising is very important, and it has great benefits on both your physical and mental health, and those benefits can be long-lasting. But how does this work specifically in the brain? There's been extensive research on these topics, explaining specific biological mechanisms, but is there a way that the benefits of exercising could be transferred from one organism to another? And that's what this paper by Miguel et al. Is trying to explore. They titled their paper, Exercise Plasma Boosts Memory and Dampens Brain Inflammation via Clusterin. And in their experiment, they had a group of control mice that did not have access to an exercise wheel, and they compared it to an experimental group of mice that did have access to an exercise wheel. And they took blood samples from both of those mouse groups, and they purified the blood to just keep the plasma. And plasma is proteins in the blood, and here in this little cartoon, it's depicted as the yellow in the blood droplet. But plasma makes up about 50% of blood, and the plasma cells contain a lot of proteins that are thought to contain the beneficial aspects of exercise within them. However, to test this effect and to see if the plasma is what's responsible for being able to transfer the effects of exercise, they injected plasma from the control group of mice that did not have access to the wheel into a recipient mouse that had also not had access to an exercise wheel. And they compared that to the mice that did exercise. They took that plasma and injected it into a second group of recipient mice that, again, did not have access to an exercise wheel. So in running these two lines of experiments, they were able to compare the results. And as you can see in this image, after a series of behavioral tests were conducted, the mice were all sacrificed and their brains were removed. And this image in particular is a section of the brain that's involved in learning and memory. And the top image shows the effects of control plasma injected into a mouse. And the bottom insert shows the effects of the runner's plasma injected into a mouse. And as you can see in the top panel, there's not a ton of brain cells. It's just kind of this one strip. And by comparison, there's a ton of branching and a lot more cells in this bottom insert of the mice that had received the runner's plasma. This just confirms that learning and memory was improved in the mice that received the runner's plasma as compared to the mice who had received the control plasma. But to specifically figure out what is causing this improvement in learning and memory and other cognitive functions, they decided to take the plasma and find which proteins were present in it between the two samples. So to do this, they did a technique called mass spectrometry. This develops this very basic bar graph which shows how much of each protein was present. But as you can see, there's no numbers here, so it's really hard to analyze. So they proceeded to go along with a more detailed graph, which looked at both the significance and the difference in amount of protein between the control sample and the runner sample. So in this graph here on the left, you can see that there is high statistical significance, which is indicated by little stars here. And that is because there is no overlap between the triangle points and the circle points. So you could almost draw a line here and differentiate between the circle points and the triangle points completely. On the other hand, if you take the graph on the right, there's a high degree of overlap. As you can see, the circle points and the triangle points are on the same plane, and therefore there's a much lower statistical significance. What you can see on the graph on the right is the comparison of the amount of protein in the control sample, which is shown as the gray bar, to the amount of protein present in the runner's plasma sample, which is shown here in the yellow. So you can see clearly that there's a lot more of this protein CFH in the runner's plasma than in the control plasma. And then in order to display all the proteins data like this in one, we have a volcano plot. And just like in the graphs that I just showed you, the difference in amount of protein is plotted on the x-axis here. And the further right you go on this graph, so the 1 and 2, indicates that there's more of that particular protein present in the runner's plasma than in the control plasma. Versus on the left-hand side of the graph, there's more of that particular protein present in the control plasma than in the runner's plasma. And then the y-axis is showing the significance, where a higher level of significance indicates that there's less overlap between points, and a lower level indicates that there is a great degree of overlapping in the points. So F13A1 is similar to serpina-7 in its high degree of significance. However, it is present in greater quantities in the runner's plasma than in the control plasma. And this was actually one of the proteins that was depicted in the graph in the previous slide. And as you can see, again, the significance is great as there is no overlap between points. And by comparison, CFH is another protein that's present in greater quantities in the runner's plasma than in the control. And again, we looked at that graph in the previous slide, but there is a lesser degree of significance, more overlap in points, so it's lower down on the y-axis. However, F13A1, CFH, and finally clusterin, or CLU, work together to reduce inflammation in the brain. So by them all being in greater quantities in the runner's plasma than in the control plasma, it indicates that mice injected with runner's plasma have decreased neuroinflammation and increased learning and memory. And therefore, we conclude by saying that yes, if you were able to transfer the plasma from one individual to another, you would be able to improve learning and memory as a result of proteins that are found in the plasma of organisms that exercise. And that's all. Thank you.